All right. Well, welcome to GreenPea Baby here in Waverly Place in Cary, North Carolina. And hopefully you've had a chance, ladies, to kind of look around the beautiful store. And thank you to GreenPea for hosting us because they really make shopping for baby simple because they have everything beautiful right here in the store. And I know a lot of you are watching at home, watching this on your own time. And so, you can just hop on to greenpea.com and check out all the beautiful things right there online at their beautiful website. So I'm Irene Googe, and I am a pediatric sleep consultant with Loving Lessons, and I've helped hundreds of families start to get sleep because at one time or other, I was not getting sleep and I was pretty miserable. So I didn't happen to get here on accident. It was very intentional that I am a sleep coach now. So those of you here with me and those of you at home, make sure you have some pen and paper to take some notes because sometimes when we're sleep deprived, we're not running on all cylinders. So go ahead, take as many notes, write down anything that you find that will be helpful for you. And you'll also see in there like a place to put your name, your email, and you can add your phone number. And of course, after our session, I'll go ahead and I've opened up my calendar to be able to make some personal calls. And those of you watching, you can shoot me your email or your phone number and I will call you as well so we can make sure we answer all of your sleep questions. So a lot of the people, thank you for also taking the time to fill out the survey and letting me know who we have coming. We have a lot of babies on this series, a lot of 0 to 5 and 6 to 12 months, and with some toddlers who are just hanging out at home. So I can understand like the crazy busyness of all of that. I saw just a couple preschoolers, but the big thing you're going to find is that all of this is applicable to all ages and all stages. And the habits that we're going to talk about are actually something that I've also been doing for myself to improve my quality of sleep. And so I find that like a lot of these things can apply to all ages and stages for everyone. And so, just kind of thinking about yourself, and I know that we've been talking here in the store and we kind of said we're tired parents. And I think parenting is really tiring because there's a lot of teachable moments throughout the day. When we have our little baby, they're depending on us for everything. With our toddlers, we have many wonderful opportunities to guide them as to how they're going to go as they get older. And so there's just a lot of things that are tiring. So after a really full day of parenting, that's exhausting, not to mention if you're having to take care of the house or go to work or anything else that you're doing. But the hard part is, I think, that if we're not getting sleep and we're exhausted and we're sleep deprived, that can actually almost like cripple us in our parenting. And then we feel like deer in headlights. And we're kind of like, I don't know what's going on. And sometimes that doesn't feel good. And I do want to just mention to those who have an infant 6 months and younger, it is a tiring journey and that's normal and it's common and it's okay, and this too shall pass. But, typically after 6 months and beyond, we can really start to be getting better sleep quality for our child and also for ourselves. So I just want to share a little bit about why or how I even got here, because when I first became a parent, I didn't read any sleep books, because I'm sure if you go online and Google anything, and you've probably seen all these sleep books, and maybe you have some of these, and you reference back to them, you might realize like, oh, here's all the things I need to know. Well, when I first started, I was like, well, I'm just going to go on mother's intuition. I'm going to follow my gut, and I was like, that's how I'm going to conquer motherhood. And I remember my mom, she came to help me out after Connor was born. And she kept saying, just keep him up and he'll sleep late. And so people always have some wonderful advice to share with us. And I don't think she was trying to sabotage sleep. I really don't, but I believed her. And so I said, okay, I'm going to keep this baby up. And so I think just right from the beginning, there was a lot of stress, a lot of advice that I didn't really know what to do. And plus, again, I didn't read any books. And when I would Google something, I was like, well, this doesn't make sense, and this makes sense, and how do I try this? And it was just like a big blur among all the hormone issues that I was dealing with as well. And I also mentioned that I had a very sick husband. In July, he went in for a major surgery. And then that December, he was going in for another major surgery. And Connor was supposed to be born at the beginning of November. And then he was actually born at the end of September. But the beautiful thing is that he was born completely healthy. Nothing was fine. He was 6'9", came in, everything was great. But one of the things I didn't realize at that time was that I was probably dealing with a lot of postpartum depression. And so my husband and I, we had a conversation. We talked about it. And I said, okay, I'm going to go to the OB. And I told him, here's what's going on. And after about an hour, and he was wonderful to take the time to talk to me. After about an hour, he said, yeah, he's like, it does sound like you have a lot going on. He's like, so, just kind of take it easy and yada, yada, yada. And I still had a baby who wasn't sleeping, a sick husband, and I had no plan of support. And I think that's kind of one of my biggest mistakes. So one of the first things and best things we can do is make sure that we have a plan for support during those early months, because that in itself could cripple us a lot of times and cause some of the sleep deprivation that we're experiencing. So I don't know that I really believe that I had postpartum depression, because even though the doctor said I had symptoms like that, I thought, well, I'm super mom. I can do it all. And so I went on my journey and was like, this is just the way it's going to be. I went back into teaching, into the classroom. Meanwhile, all this with a 6-week-old at the time. So it was just a really crazy time for myself and my family. And one other thing that that was not going well was that nursing was not very well established. We just had a really hard time getting Connor to latch on, which was a little more frustrating through that whole journey. And so, as you can imagine, with all of this stuff going on, I became a very reactive parent. I was kind of like, well, whatever's going to work. Like, I will rock you, I will hold you, I will do whatever it is, and it was going to work. And so it would work short term, but then it would stop, and then we'd be on to the next whatever is going to work to make it happen. And so a lot of times people wonder, like, well, what about co-sleeping? How do you feel about co-sleeping? Well, I'll just share that I was co-sleeping for over 3.5 years. Connor slept right here in my arm, and I can still actually sometimes feel him, because that was the only way anyone was going to get sleep. But I would consider us reactive co-sleepers, because even though I love the snuggles, and that was great, the downfall was that my husband wasn't getting sleep and I wasn't getting sleep, and so we were miserable. And so when our second son was born in 2008, we said, we're not going to let this happen again. Whatever happened with the first one, we're going to make it better with the second. And so the first 4 months, we were back to square one. No one was sleeping, and it was kind of a little bit nightmarish again. But I also at that time decided I'm going to stay home and take care of children in my home. And I was like, okay, other people do this. I've seen moms, they do daycares in their home, no problem. So here I was taking care of 4 children under the age of 3 by myself, and I had 2 non-sleepers. And so I would put the one little girl down and she went right to sleep. Put the one little boy down, he went right to sleep. And then here I was with my baby, and we were rocking and shoving the pacifier in the mouth and doing whatever. And then I had to go lay in the race car bed with my toddler. So it was just a nightmare. And I remember that day, it was January 5th of 2009. And I remember, like, I can't do this. Like, I don't understand how people do this. I was like, something has to change. And the one mom, she said, well, have you read Kim West's book, Good Night Sleep Tight by the Sleep Lady? And I said, no, but I will read about anything. Because meanwhile, I had already read, one book on the spectrum of sleep here and one book here. And I was all confused as to what to try and do. And so what I found was that it was a very balanced approach. I was like, this is doable. I can handle this. And so by the end of that week, I had gotten Bailey sleeping from 6:30 to 6:30. And the following week, we kind of started establishing naps a little bit more. And he was actually taking 2 2-hour naps, which was amazing. And I had never known what nap time was or any of that. So this was like, oh, like all the angels were just singing for me. And one of the things that was such a huge blessing at that time was I was home with these other children, and I was dealing with these former frustrations, because all of a sudden I started getting sleep. And I started doing the Sleep Lady Shuffle with my oldest son. And this is sometimes what happens with gentle sleep solutions, is we might get stuck. So even though he was sleeping in his bed, I was still sleeping on an air mattress in the hallway. And so we were really not sleeping. We didn't have the family bed with my husband and I. So, it was still not like the most conducive state of sleep because we were still dealing with me sleeping on an air mattress in the hall. So nap times and bedtimes, I spent a lot of time starting to read and research and learning from other experts and other coaches. And I was realizing that all of a sudden it wasn't so much that it was sleep sometimes the issue, it was that I needed some healing to understand what was going on with sleep. And I think that's truly when my transformation in parenting happened. And I was able to shift the way I was going to parent, because you know what? I really wanted to be a parent that was going to be loving and respectful. And then I found myself that I was yelling, and I hated that about myself. So I was trying to figure out, well, how do I make that shift? How do I switch that up? And I think that sometimes, and those of you out there or here, I think if you ask yourself, like, what kind of parent you want to be, some of us might say, I want to be just like my mom and dad. They did a great job. Maybe I want to do something a little bit better. But the majority of families that I talk to or parents that I meet, they usually say, I will never do what my parents did. I want to do it so much different or so much better. But the challenge is that we've already been programmed. We've already set the limits and the boundaries, and we have a way we're going to respond. So sometimes we have to retrain our brains. And that was something that was a huge learning for me. So, one of the things I want you to think about as we talk about sleep is some of it is we might be needing to retrain our brain, and we might need some healing through the process. And our children are the best ones who are going to teach us this. And that's why Loving Lessons is called Loving Lessons, because we're going to learn exactly what we need from the little ones that we're taking care of. So one of the things before we dive into, the habits that are going to help improve sleep is that sometimes we just need some education. Sometimes we need to understand how sleep works. Sometimes we need to realize that we might need to tweak our habits a little bit. Maybe think about becoming more intentional about some of the things we're doing. I don't think I ever have seen a family say, I'd like to go ahead and serve up some Coke and Lucky Charms for my baby when they start their first food. We kind of realize that that's probably not a good healthy habit to get established right from the beginning. Now, when they're 2 and they see people doing that, they might want it, but we realize that that's not going to be helping our body grow big and strong. And the same thing goes for activity. We don't say, I would like my child to be a couch potato. I would really like them to just sit on the couch and veg out all day in front of the screens. So, we realize that we need to take them out to the park, get active, and do things like that. Well, the same thing kind of goes with sleep. We have to be very intentional about that. And unfortunately, we live in a society that doesn't really value healthy habits. And there's a lot of things that are going to be maybe sabotaging those healthy habits that we're trying to establish. And it might not necessarily be the norm of where we're going as well. So, like I said, we've got a lot of things working against us, but sometimes just looking for the things within us and being that light for our families is a huge shift that we can change. And so that's my hope for all of the families, here and out there listening. I want you to realize that you're leaving a legacy for your little one. You are your little one's light, and everything that they do and become is because of you. And so it is a huge responsibility, but also a huge blessing at the same time. And it's a very exciting journey. And I've had a really good time learning that with my little ones. So today we're going to talk about those 7 habits for sleep-filled nights, so we can have happy parents, healthy children, and harmonious homes, because that's going to really help us be able to retrain our brains and get ourselves back on track with those good sleep habits. So I want to share some mistakes that we make and then how we can incorporate these habits. So one of the first mistakes that sometimes we make as parents is that we have bedtime is too late. And so when we have too late of a bedtime, what ends up happening is we miss our child's sleep window. So what we want to do is create a habit of getting to bed on time. And so when we get to bed on time, we figure out how much sleep does my child need. And you're going to see on the back of the brochure, or those of you online at home, you'll have a sleep chart that you can reference. And it's going to tell you how much sleep your little one needs. And so my boys now are 7 and 5, and they wake up every day, no matter what, at 6:30 because the circadian rhythm is so rigid. And that's just when their body is trained, like this is when we wake up. And so we have to adjust bedtime accordingly. So on my clock, this is their bedtime. We really work to get into bed. And we start bedtime routine probably around 6 o'clock. So we have to just shift things earlier a little bit to make sure that we're going to be able to help them fill their sleep tank. Because what ends up happening is sleep is very restorative and rejuvenating. And when we work with our body and we are working when the melatonin is naturally being produced in the body, then the child can actually go to sleep and sleep restfully. But if we miss that sleep window, what ends up happening is they get their second wind and the cortisol kicks in. And then they're kind of running around and you're going, now they don't even look tired, but that's because you've missed the sleep window. So we want to think about fueling them up for a good night of sleep, because we want to send them off into their daycare or preschool situations or school, or worst case scenario, when they're home with us, we want to enjoy that time. We want to fill their sleep tank so they feel good, because we wouldn't want it to run on E and be stuck. And I think sometimes that's where we might find ourselves if we're in that sleep deprived state. So really working to kind of get out of the sleep deprived state, and fill the sleep tank. The second mistake that parents will make is sometimes skipping naps. And I'm going to pull out some of my memory game cards that we used to play and a telescope. And as an educator, I want to tell you that naps are really important for the school years. They really help with memory and focus for our children. And so when we talk about naps, we want to think about a nap being one sleep window, which is 45 minutes. We want them to get at least that, especially during the first 6 months, working towards getting that. Because typically I hear families say, well, we have naps, but they last about 20 or 30 minutes. Those are typically kind of disaster naps, so we want to help our baby through and get the better 45-minute sleep window. But if you take a look also on the sleep chart, you're going to notice that your baby might need 2.5, 3 hours of sleep. So we really want them to get 2 sleep windows, which is the 45 minutes and 45 minutes, so about an hour and a half, because then they're going to wake up and they're going to feel restored and rejuvenated, and you're not going to feel exhausted. So creating a habit of protecting that daytime sleep, and maybe even for our older children, rest. I think all children, all the way until they get to kindergarten, should be having a rest time. It's typical that somewhere between age 3 and 4, they may let go of the nap, but I would still work to create that limit and that boundary of having that good rest time. Because the trouble with these two mistakes, when we have too late of a bedtime or we skip naps, what ends up happening is that our babies will actually wake up more frequently at night. And sometimes they may wake up before 6 in the morning. And waking up somewhere between 6 and 7:30 is very normal and very acceptable, even though sometimes 6 seems super early. But that's one of the things like that will happen. Our babies will start waking up at 5 or 5:30, and going back to sleep between 3 and 6 in the morning is really hard for our little ones. And the other thing that ends up happening is that we end up not realizing that we're not getting that good sleep for ourselves, and we're depriving ourselves of those good sleep patterns as well. When we think about sleep, we want to think about a nice dark room. And GreenPea has, curtains that you can make for blackout curtains, and customize them to your bedroom and whatnot. So the room environment is really nice and dark for our little ones to get that good sleep. Also think about maybe using a sound machine to kind of have that constant, continuous sound in there to help them realize this is my social cue. This lets me know it is still sleep time. And the most important thing for bedtime is that we want to be putting our child down awake. which leads us to our next mistake we make, is that sometimes we do it all for our child. Sometimes we don't know that our child can really put themselves to sleep. And so we will rock them, hold them, nurse them, carry them, give them a pacifier, whatever it is that we do to help them get to sleep. And if you can kind of shift your mind, especially for those who have babies and children 6 months and older, believe that your child can do it. Believe in them and empower your child, in creating that habit of empowering your child to be able to do the things that are age appropriate. Babies that are 6 months and younger, they really can't do some of this. So they need these sleep crutches. But after about 6 months of age, we can start shifting that and allowing them to do it for themselves. And sometimes people refer to sleep crutches or sleep associations. What ends up happening is that our baby wakes up when they're having a partial arousal, and we all do. You and I, when we wake up, we just kind of adjust the blanket, put our head back down, and we go right back to sleep. Our child, if we've done all the work for them at bedtime, when they wake up 2 hours later, they say, "Hey, Mom, hey, Dad, I need you to do that thing you do to help me get back to sleep." And so then we're kind of in that stuck vicious cycle, and we have to go in and help them do whatever it is that we do. So really work towards creating that habit of empowering your child and allowing them to be able to put themselves to sleep. And I really love what the baby whisperer says. She says, "Do now as you mean to do later." And so, sometimes we think, well, I really love this extra snuggle time and love doing that. And I love it too. And it doesn't mean you don't have to do it and you have to stop. It just means maybe we change the times we do it and have those snuggles and cuddles and rocking at different times and not necessarily during sleep times. Which leads me to the fourth mistake we make, and this is my big one. This is the one that I have struggled with the most, and I still continue to work on it. And my son Connor is that constant reminder of why I need to work on this habit. And that is that we're inconsistent. We have a hard time being consistent as parents. We may waffle on things. And so creating that habit of being consistent is going to be really important. And I am going to show you my little bullseye to keep it on target, because our children will allow us to practice. And we can practice to become consistent, because what ends up happening is that we can actually end up teaching our child to cry and whine when we're not consistent. And so there's kind of 3 scenarios when it comes to sleep coaching about consistency that ends up happening. The first being that a lot of times, when we put our baby to sleep, we do all the work for them with whatever the sleep crutch is, but then our baby will wake up and all of a sudden we'll go and we'll say, "Okay, this time I'm going to rock you and you'll go back to sleep. The next time I'm going to patch you and you go back to sleep." And then you're like, "Oh, okay, well now I think you're ready to eat, so now I'm going to feed you back to sleep." And then all of a sudden Dad goes in and he starts rocking or doing something. He says, "It's just not working. Why don't you feed the baby?" And so now we've mixed up all of those responses, and the baby's saying, "What? I don't know what to expect." So one of the biggest things is working on creating that consistent response for your child, because that can really become very confusing to them as to what's happening at night. The second thing is that, there's really only 3 ways to sleep train your baby. There's extinction, which is full out leaving your baby to cry, which I would not recommend for any baby 6 months and younger. And it will work, but you have to be uber consistent about it. And that is like literally leaving the baby and leaving them to cry and see you in the morning. But sometimes what ends up happening is that we say, "Okay, tonight's the night. We're going to do crying out." And so we've done all the work for our baby at bedtime, which is the easiest time of day to teach your baby to go to sleep. But when they first wake up, we say, "Okay, now you're going to learn to cry it out." And so our baby will cry, and we say maybe whatever the magic number is for you and your family. You say 30 minutes, 1 hour. You're like, "We're going to do that." And so baby is still crying, and they've reached your magic number. And then you're like, "Oh my gosh, they're going to keep crying." So we go in, we rock them, hold them, nurse them, feed them, or whatever it is that we do. And now we've taught them. Now all I have to do is cry for 1 hour, and then my mom or dad will come in, and we've just sealed the deal with that. And that's how we can end up teaching our child to cry longer and harder. And my Connor, we did cry it out with him as well. And all we did was learn to teach him to cry longer and harder. And it was not very fun. And it makes it a little bit more challenging later when you are trying to do some, sleep coaching, because we're trying to break those bad patterns. And then the third thing that we can really be inconsistent, and this was a huge one. And again, I've made all these mistakes and done them really well and created some really bad habits. But with this one, when Connor was little, we would walk him back to the bedroom every time he would wake up. And that's why I ended up sleeping on the air mattress, because then he would just hit the mattress and know to go right back to bed. And so I was like, okay, we take him back and he's still waking up. But I was like, okay, after 5 in the morning, just hop into bed so we can get that last hour or two of good Z's. Well, kids, of course, don't know how to tell time, so they just keep waking up. And so it's really important to make sure whatever your plan is, make sure you have a consistent response through the night, because that's going to be key so that you're actually responding to your child and not becoming reactive. And that's one of the first things I really learned during my first 3.5 years of sleep deprivation, was that I was completely reactive. I was just reacting instead of having a plan in place and then responding to them. So the fifth mistake that ends up happening is that we get into this, well, it must be genetic. It must be dad's genes or mom's genes, and this is why something is happening. And sometimes that is actually true. But sometimes we want to just be working to create that habit instead of blaming who maybe had the bad genes or whatnot, maybe just checking in for that clean bill of health. And typically some big ones that hold babies back, like, things that might not be, and if you have this pattern, that's something to explore with your pediatrician, is if there's reflux or asthma or allergies or obstructive sleep apnea. And one of the things that I ended up learning about Connor through my sleep consultation with Kim West was, oh my gosh, I think he has obstructive sleep apnea. Because during my training, I was listening to the class, and when I had my consultation, it all kind of came together beautifully. And I was like, I'm being super consistent. I'm walking him back. I'm doing everything possible, but he is still waking up. So sometimes there could be that underlying medical concern that could be holding your child back. So, and one thing I'll share about obstructive sleep apnea is sometimes if your child's like really sweaty, maybe they're a mouth breather, those are things to kind of look for and kind of discuss with your pediatrician and kind of see. And I realized I wasn't even asking my pediatrician the right questions or telling them that, because they kept saying, well, just leave him to cry it out. It'll be okay. Just leave him to cry it out. But it wasn't working because there was something else going on. So this is where sometimes we do have to go back to our mother's instinct and kind of follow through with it. But I will also share that sometimes there's those internal things with our babies, but sometimes there's the external factors. And the external factors could be mom or dad being stressed out or anxious about the crying, or maybe falling into some kind of depression. So realizing that sometimes if we're not taking care of ourselves, we're going to have a really hard time taking care of our baby. So just like on the airplanes, they say to put on your mask first, then your child's. That's the same thing with parenting and sleep coaching. You want to take care of yourself first so that you can then take care of your child. The next mistake we make is that sometimes we may find ourselves disconnecting with our child. And I find this one to be really true. Like, there's been times I am home all day with my kids and other people's children, and by the end of the night, I'm like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? And we feel really distant. And so all of a sudden, we feel like we're all over the place. We are feeling very disconnected. And so sometimes our daily interactions during that wakeful time, we want to work to see, how are we connecting with one another? How are we learning and observing each other so that we are connecting? Because if we're disconnecting, we're going to have a really hard time at bedtime. The other thing that ends up happening is by the end of the day, we've had a full day, and our little ones all of a sudden want our attention even more, because we've just gone through that witching hour where dinner time is crazy, dad or mom is coming home from work, we're coming home from daycare, whatever the situation is. So there's a lot of opportunities to disconnect there. Now it's time for bed, and all of a sudden we're having a power struggle. And we're trying to get them to bed, and maybe cortisol's kicking in, and now we're disconnecting because we're saying, I'm going to take away your lovey, I'm going to take away this, or I'm going to do that. And so now we're making it even more distant. So really be mindful of how you're connecting. And I work with families to really help instill a lot of positive parenting strategies. There's a lot of resources I like and can share with you about, how are you connecting throughout the day during transitions, during meals, during diaper changes. Having that quality time when you do have your little one is going to make a huge difference for night. And a big thing too is that in the morning, having a really rock solid morning routine is going to establish how the night is going to be. So if you're starting your morning off kind of rough and groggy, then kind of know that that's kind of how the night's going to go. So really work to improve that morning time routine to be connecting, because even if you're tired and you're like, oh, here we go again, then that's going to be the tone for the rest of the day. So I encourage families to really take 10 deep breaths. Like take it in, blow it out. And Frozen says it best by letting it go. And so really making sure that you get that, energy out so that you're really building to connect together. And I know I've been covering a lot, but here's one last mistake we make. And sometimes it's that we have a lot of screen time during the day and looking at the activities that we're doing during wakeful time. And some people might say, well, I have a baby, they don't really watch the TV. But there's a chance that mom or dad are maybe on their, cell phone or iPad, or there's a TV on or a computer on or something. And babies are attracted to that light. And that light can really kind of throw off the circadian rhythm more than we realize. And I have found that to be very true with my boys now as they get older, and how important it is to limit those screen times. So, this habit, I encourage families to create optimal activities and playtimes. What does that look like? Making sure we're doing age-appropriate activities. Babies needing to be on the floor, doing a lot of floor time, using their core muscles, which is going to tire them out for those next naps. Toddlers, let's not push them in strollers. Let's get them walking and running and burn that energy, because that's what toddlers do best. And just kind of shifting the way you work and spend your wakeful time is going to be really important. So, in the recommendation from the American Academy of Pediatrics is no screen time for the first 2 years of life. So just being mindful of, what am I doing with my child? And, if we do have screen time, there is a lot of grace and forgiveness in parenting, and sometimes it's okay. So it's one of those things when you think about all of these habits or all of these mistakes, it's not that we have to change everything and just be hardcore. It's making small changes that are going to last for a long time, and just being mindful of like certain things that might be triggering our child, causing them not to get the sleep that they need. So I know I've shared a lot of information, and there are a lot of factors to a great night of sleep, but it is possible to get sleep-filled nights. And when you're implementing these changes, you may be wondering, well, where do I start? What's the habit I should start with? And the first one that I usually start with a lot of families is that earlier bedtime. Start with getting to bed on time. Look at what time is my child really waking up and what time are they going to sleep, and watch how that can make a change. When we make that one change, and then we can eventually work on maybe the sleep crutches and changing those things up. But kind of taking it one step at a time and having a plan is going to get you long-term results where you're not going to be reactive, but then you're going to be responding. So, and I know everybody is in a different place in their journey. So those of you online, you'll get a link to my calendar, and you can go ahead and we'll set up a time to talk. And I want to answer your questions because every case is very personal. So, and I want to make sure that it makes the most sense for you and your baby. So thank you so much for your time, and I wish you and your family the sweet dreams you deserve.